Why is India, the fourth largest economy, still facing a power problem?
So we have three issues at hand. One is the coal output problem. The other is the grid infrastructure problem. Third is the T&D losses problem.
Got it. So could you please go deeper and explain each problem properly?
So Ganesh, if you look at what our country has been doing in the power sector, was crippled with a lot of policy problems in the past, where there was no growth in terms of coal output, and still the power plants were put up. Hence, these power plants could not make power at the cost that they wanted to, because they had to import a lot of coal. That is where the whole crisis started. So biggest problem has been the losses, the T&D losses that our country has. It's a problem of leakage, right? You can keep on producing more power, but if it is getting leaked out of the system, the losses keep on mounting. And we have almost 15 to 16% kind of a loss versus a China where, the losses are just 2%.
2%?
Right, yes. So that's where the gap. I mean, just imagine any business has an EBITDA margin of what? 14, 15% at max, right? And if 15% is just shaved off from these kind of losses in a commodity kind of a sector, how can you make profits? The whole ecosystem doesn't make profit. Hence, it is very difficult to seed a lot of investment in that sector, right? So what we are looking at, the government is trying to plug the loopholes. And please understand, India and China are at the forefront of the energy ecosystem if you think about the capabilities. And we can blame India about a lot of things, but if you go to the grids in the Western world, they are grids which have not had investment for decades. They've invested very heavily in technology. So the 20-25 years kind of technology bull run that the US has had, but it is now facing a crisis because it did not invest in the energy ecosystem in terms of grid infrastructure, in terms of power, manufacturing, and hence their data centers are facing a power crisis. We in our country are lucky that at least the capacities are there and capacities are getting built. It is a problem of the whole political will to reduce the T&D losses, which is the forefront issue over here. Because if you look at in renewable energy, our capacities are growing faster than the US. In China also the same thing is happening, right? So in terms of manufacturing of these components as well, solar panels, windmills, T&D equipments, India is at the forefront. In fact, US is importing a lot of this stuff from India and China, right? So the whole point is that our country has the right set of ingredients for it to have a 20 years kind of a bull run which US had in tech, we can have in energy.
First is, you stated that we used to import coal.
Yeah.
We are the fifth largest producer of coal, right? Yeah. Then why did we have to import coal?
So the whole problem was that, Coal India, which is a government monopoly, couldn't increase its output by more than 2% for a decade altogether. And that's where the energy demand is always higher at 7-8% and the output of coal is just 2%. And that's where the whole crisis of domestic coal availability, not the, mines, but the availability in terms of output was because of the inefficiencies that the monopoly had.
But why so? Why didn't they produce more power?
See, it's a government undertaking, right? And it faces a lot of challenges in terms of approval. So it's just not about whether Coal India wants to produce or not. It's also about the judiciary and the local, public, their revolt, and whether approvals of those mines take time. So the whole process, in a way, took a lot of time, and then the bureaucracy of the company itself meant that the output could not be brought on time, which we wanted. And that's where I guess we got crippled in this crisis, which led to import of a lot of coal, the exchequer, doling out a lot of dollars out of the country, and the whole power cost in the country did not come down, even though the capacity was there. So I guess with renewables, that problem is getting solved. We don't need any output which is going to come from a mine or any input which is coming from any of the natural resources. It's a resource which is available full time. And the whole problem is being solved by entrepreneurs and the government building an ecosystem about solar and wind, where the hybrid parks or with storage now with the whole solution. Now we are looking at where almost the country's incremental demand is completely met by renewables, and even replacement demand is met by renewables. And that is where I believe a lot of these challenges, if we solve the storage problem, so renewables have a storage problem, they cannot be stored. So now already the government has been working on hybrid parks where storage is also there. 2-hour storage will then go to 4-hour storage. So I believe the problems of the past would not haunt us in the future because we've made very good investments in the grid and we are doing that. Power Grid has done a phenomenal job in terms of making a grid able to transact power between states. It's very difficult. In US, you don't have that. In US, there are states which don't talk to each other. In India, we have all the states who talk to each other in terms of energy flow. And hence, the ecosystem is robust. We need to upgrade it for the modern requirements of the renewable energy sector. But if that is in tandem, going hand in hand, we believe the solution to this problem is in the very near future.
Got it. And the second problem that you mentioned was T&D losses. Can you explain T&D losses in simple words?
So T&D losses in simple words is basically you're producing an output of 100 units, but when it is going and reaching the end consumer, it is only reaching around 85 units. So there are 15 units being lost. 15 units can be lost due to various factors. Either you're not stepping up and stepping down power efficiently because the grid needs to transport the power. So there can be losses in the transportation that are natural, but those also can be reduced by investment in the grid. Then there can be leakages in terms of people drawing unauthorized power in a country where a lot of consumers draw that unauthorized power. And also there can be a lot of issues in terms of manufacturing the power. So power cannot be stored, right? If it is manufactured, it needs to be dispatched. So if the demand and supply is not matched properly, we lose power over there also. So the lot of substation infrastructure needs to be upgraded to do that.
And so the third problem that you spoke about was the grid infrastructure.
Yeah.
In fact, we had Shreya over here some time ago.
Yeah.
She is the co-founder of Solar Square.
Yeah.
And she said that the grid infrastructure in India is broken. And that needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
So what do you first of all mean by a grid infrastructure? And what is broken about it?
Yeah. So what is a grid? Please understand. A grid is basically an infrastructure where there are transmission lines which are set up for the power to reach the consumers, right? So if I'm producing in, for example, Kutch of Gujarat, I need electricity in Surat. So it needs to be transmitted and that happens through these transmission lines. And the grid is set up by the power grid of our country and it has a lot of players which help power grid to do that. But that is where the whole grid infrastructure is put up to transport power. Now, this transportation can be just within Gujarat, can be just within Rajasthan or just within Maharashtra. But we have been lucky that there have been a lot of investment made in the country to build a national grid, which then talks to each other. And then any power surplus in a state can be transported to a deficient state. And that infrastructure, though is a bit outdated in certain places, it needs to be fixed. But we have the necessary ingredients, I would say. It is not broken to the extent that we've seen in Europe or maybe in the US. It is definitely much, much better as infrastructure which can enable a lot of new technologies that we are talking about. And if done properly, the T&D losses in the country can also reduce if these upgrades are happening. Of course, the old grid was made by a thesis that power would be made at a particular place and it would be transported to the consumers in the whole country. But now the reality is every household can be a producer of power by solar, or every company can be a producer of power with solar and these kind of technologies, right? So now we have a problem that you need a two-way communication in the grid, that there can be consumers and producers at the same time at every household or every corporate. And that is where, if not properly enabled, the grid could cripple or the grid crisis could come because it is not able to do these adjustments of collecting and disseminating power. And that is where we are talking about that energy ecosystem has a great runway in our country, because we will need a lot of investments to enable the grid. A lot of companies would come around with solutions of selling power to each other, which Kimble is also in a way producing a software which can enable buying and selling of power on the exchange. So we have an exchange ecosystem in a country where power is freely traded. So what I'm trying to tell you is, we can look at the problem. There is a problem, but the point is, where are we in terms of the solution? So we have built the blocks already. It will require significant investment, but we are not far away out. Because if the basic building blocks were not there, we might have taken, maybe 15, 20 years. Now with these blocks in place, we are maybe 5-7 years away from the solution rather than 10, 20 years away from the solution.
That is amazing, sir. Hi guys, if you loved watching this clip and if you want to do a deep dive into the podcast, we've mentioned the link in the description. So click that link, watch that podcast and take notes. Thank you for watching and subscribe for more clips.